On today's show, the Cavs have continuity on the roster, but they also have continuity on the coaching staff. I think year number 2 of Kenny Atkinson in Cleveland is going to mean big things for the Cavs. I'll tell you why on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody, and welcome into another edition of Locked On Cavs. I'm Danny Cunningham, and I cover the team over at my Substack, The Inside Shot, and I just want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure you are subscribed as the season gets started, and you can check us out on YouTube as well. If you are watching right now, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5. And if your first $5 bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started today. I talked on yesterday's show a little bit about the roster continuity that the Cavs have because the core four, as it's been called, has now been together for several years. We're going into the fourth year of Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, all being together. And of course, some other guys have been part of that too for that entire run. But this year, we are going into year number 2 of Kenny Atkinson. And obviously there was the roster continuity going from 2 years ago to last year, where they essentially had the same exact roster from year to year. And that's not the case this year because they did make some personnel changes to the team that actually is on the floor. But the head coach is staying the same. And I think that is a really interesting thing that maybe we don't talk about enough, because last year, Kenny Atkinson came in and he did something that I think is really difficult to do in the NBA and really just all professional sports, if we're being honest. He took a team that was good and he pushed them to be great. And going from bad to good is difficult. It's a challenging thing to do. Right? We saw this in Detroit last year where JB Bickerstaff took the Pistons from 14 wins 2 years ago to 44 wins last year. They went from not just bad, but like horrific to good. And that's a challenging thing to do. But the reason why Kenny Atkinson won Coach of the Year, despite the fact that he picked up a team that won 48 games the year before and pushed them to 64, is because it's so much more difficult to go from winning 48 games to 64 games than it is from like somewhere in the 20s to somewhere in the 40s. We see a team make that jump almost every year in the NBA, but what we don't see is a team that was already a top 4 team in the East, which the Cavs were, or the West for that matter too, which the Cavs were for back-to-back years, and make them great. And that's what happened last year in year 1 of Kenny Atkinson. But I look at what this could be in year number 2 of Kenny Atkinson, and I think it could mean a couple of different things. And continuity is important. That is an advantage that the Cavs have over a lot of teams in the NBA going into this season. I mean, think about how many teams made moves this summer and are tangibly different, right? Like the Orlando Magic are a team that are looked at to be, could be what the Cavs were last year, where they go from like a middle of the pack team in the Eastern Conference. I think they finished 7th last year. I think they would have been higher up in the East had they not dealt with as many catastrophic injuries throughout the season as they did, with Jalen Suggs missing so much time. Mo Wagner obviously missed a ton of time. Franz Wagner missed a bunch of time. Paulo Banchero missed a bunch of time. Like most of the important players in Orlando missed a lot of time last year, and they still finished 7th. So they went from a team, they could go from a team that was really good to a team that could be great, but they also made a really big change to the roster by acquiring Desmond Bane. The Cavs didn't do that, going from good to great. And that I do think made it maybe a little bit easier because they had continuity going into it. And I think that's part of the reason why I look at what Kenny Atkinson could do with his own personal continuity and think this could be something that boosts the Cavs. And I say that because if you look at Kenny Atkinson's coaching career, it has not necessarily been the smoothest ride in terms of the teams that he's had. Go back to the teams that he was coaching in Brooklyn, right? He gets there and the Nets are bad. They are in a bad spot just from a personnel standpoint. They're not very talented. They have some nice pieces like D'Angelo Russell, a good player, Karis LeVert, a good player, Jared Allen, a good player. Obviously, those guys have all achieved success in the NBA, but they were not expected to be very good. And I do think it's fair to say, looking back at those groups, they certainly overachieved. And I know that Cavs fans certainly feel that too, because you look at the draft pick that became Colin Sexton. When the Cavs made that trade, the thought was, oh, the Nets are going to be really bad. This is going to be a top 3 pick. And it turned out to be the 8th pick in the draft because Kenny Atkinson and that team overachieved despite having not a lot of talent. So he takes that team and gets them to overachieve their way into the postseason. And that year, I believe they were the 6th seed and lost to the Philadelphia 76ers in the first round of the playoffs, which was a big accomplishment for that group. That was a great culture that was built, and the Nets were trending in the right direction. And then from there, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving show up, and it just becomes a much more chaotic situation. And expectations go from not very much to you better win the title now. And that is more on par with what expectations are in Cleveland now. But the situation is not chaotic. So I think that the lessons that he learned from those first versions of the Nets weren't necessarily applicable to the Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving Nets. I just think because of how much different those teams were, how much expectations changed, and not necessarily how different those teams were on the floor, but how different the personality of those teams were, was a really big shift in Brooklyn back then under Kenny Atkinson. So let's fast forward to now. And obviously Kenny also picked up experience as an assistant, both in LA with the Clippers and in Golden State with the Warriors. And he brings that here. And I think that we could see a big jump. And when I say a big jump, I am speaking more so about the postseason, because they won 64 games last year. There's not a big jump to be had in terms of regular season success. Could they win 64 games again this year? Sure. I don't necessarily know that I would bet on that happening. I think if you set the over-under at 63.5, I'm probably taking the under there. Like, I would not expect them to match their win total. I think they'll still be really good. But I think there could be a big jump in understanding this team. I think there could be a big jump in optimizing this team. And I think that all those things could lead to a big jump in the postseason, which is ultimately the thing that, as I mentioned on yesterday's show, the thing that they're going to be judged upon. And I think that this jump could come in a number of different ways, because I think that he learned a lot about this group last year. And there is a lot of continuity. Like, it's not the same exact team. Obviously, Ty Jerome is gone. Isaac Okoro is gone. Larry Nance Jr. is in. Lonzo Ball is in. Like, you look at this team and it is just going to be a little bit different than it was last year. But I still think that Kenny learned enough about this group, both in terms of play style and in terms of personality, that I think it's going to pay off this year. Because I look at some of the things that have been said so far, both by Kenny about certain players and by certain players about Kenny, and I just get the sense that he's so much more comfortable with the Cavs this year than he was 12 months ago. And it is fair to say that as the season went along last year, he became more comfortable with the Cavs, and that's going to happen in any line of work, right? Like, the first time I turned this mic on Locked On Cavs, was I the most comfortable doing all this stuff? No, I thought, okay, am I doing this right? Am I doing the ads at the right time? Am I doing everything correctly? Like, you are thinking about so many different things when you're doing something new. And last year, I do think Kenny Atkinson was thinking about so many different things because the Cavs were new to him. He needed to see how certain things worked in certain situations. And obviously, a lot went really well. He won Coach of the Year. The Cavs won 64 games. But I also think that he probably learned some lessons, both in the postseason and in the lead up to the postseason, that will make him a better coach this year, and in turn will make the Cavs a better team in the playoffs this year. One of the things is the defensive side of the floor. And I want to talk about that a little bit coming up, because I do think that is an area where the Cavs can improve. I think lineup optimization is another one of these things. You know, I have talked, feels like ad nauseum, about playing Sam Merrill more at his natural position of shooting guard, about playing DeAndre Hunter as the small forward, and that should be the starting lineup. And I do think that is the direction they're going to go. But I think that he gathered a lot of information last year as far as those things go. And I think all of that's going to be really beneficial. And then I also think that there's just going to be a much more different level of comfort that Kenny's going to have with the Cavs this year. And that's one of the things that's been asked about over the past couple of days here at training camp, where last year Kenny Atkinson came into a situation where he was hired by the Cavs. I believe it was in June. I believe it was last June. I'm not positive of the timeline. I don't know if it was the end of May or the start of June. I don't quite remember. But he was hired by the Cavs, and he didn't really get to be the head coach of the Cavs. And I say that because he was hired by the Cavs. He was an assistant coach for Team France, preparing for the Olympics. So that was one of his responsibilities. I'm not going to sit here and try and guess what he prioritized every day or, how he was splitting up his time that summer. But I do think it was really difficult to sort of prepare for not only the start of the season, and I mean, they started off 15-0, so maybe it didn't quite matter. But I just think the fact that he was able to spend all of last year coaching this team and then getting to kind of have a summer and decompress a little bit and start to build the relationships that maybe he didn't get the opportunity to build as thoroughly as he would have liked last summer. I look at what last year was, and I can't say that it was like a ceiling or a floor, because I think maybe for the regular season that was their ceiling, and maybe for the postseason that kind of was their floor. Like I don't think anything could have gone worse than a second round exit for a 64-win team last year. I think they probably ended up at their worst possible outcome because they were never going to lose that series to Miami. But I look at this and just say, I think because of all these things, because of the relationships, because of the comfort level, because of what he learned his first year on the job, I think that the Cavs are in line to get kind of a second-year bump from Kenny Atkinson. I think that the guys are more comfortable with Kenny as coach of this team. I think Kenny is more comfortable with the guys that are on this roster because now they've been through battles together. They're not trying to learn each other. And I do think when you have a training camp situation like the Cavs had last year, where there was some sort of pressure on the team, and there is pressure on this team this year, don't get me wrong, there certainly is, but where there was some sort of pressure on the team to show that, hey, we could do more than just be a second round exit team, which they ultimately didn't do, but I think they proved that more is there. They just didn't achieve it last year. So with all of that hanging over their heads last year, and this year there's a different type of pressure, but I think there's a different type of comfort level on all sides. And I think that maybe that's not going to show up, like the Cavs might not win 20 games to start the season this year, the way they did last year by winning 15 straight. But I do think that will be something that pays off in the long run. And I think that we're seeing an increased level of comfort at training camp so far that I think should make you optimistic this year about how the Cavs are going to be on the floor. Now, there's one thing that the Cavs said all year last year that just wasn't true. I do think there's a chance it could be true this year. We're going to talk about the defensive side of the floor next, right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show brought to you by Monarch Money. Did you know that most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments? And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money, because it's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your phone or on your laptop. Monarch built for people with busy lives. So if you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. They do the heavy lifting for you, where you can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel like you are in complete control of your money without ever having to touch a spreadsheet, because Monarch will handle it for you. If that sounds like something that you want, and it should sound like something that you want, well, don't let this financial opportunity slip through the cracks. You can use code LOCKEDONNBA, that is LOCKEDON NBA, at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. Again, that's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. Again, head to monarchmoney.com and use code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. And like I said earlier, you can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts. Please make sure you subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you choose to listen. So the Cavs last year, all throughout the year, would echo the sentiment that they were a defense-first team. And that was just, I don't want to say it wasn't the priority for them, because I do think that they wanted to be better defensively than they were. But ultimately, they were an offense-first team. right? Like how many games last year can you think of just off the top of your head? Go back through the regular season and think, you know what? Cavs didn't play great defense that day, but they were so potent offensively that it didn't matter, that they could outscore anybody. And they could, because they finished with the number one offense in the NBA and the second most efficient offense in NBA history. When you have that sort of offense, you are an offense first team. And I expect the Cavs to have a very good, if not great, offense again this year. I actually think that it could be a little bit more efficient this year. But I also think that at some point, probably soon, we will hear from this group that they are a defense first team. And I don't know that that's not going to be true this year. I do think if there's one area that I look at and say that area could take a big step up, it is the defensive side of the floor for the Cavs. So last year they finished with the number 8 defense in basketball, which is fine. That is passable. I don't think it was championship level defense. I think considering what their personnel was, they probably should have been better on that end of the floor. And I think that they didn't build the best defensive habits because of that. I do think that, and I talked about this a lot on yesterday's show about the regular season mattering. And I think the place where it matters the most is on the defensive end of the floor. I think a very clear challenge to the Cavs, and I don't know what their goals are specifically. I have an idea of them, but I don't know like word for word what their team goals are this year. But I look at this and say, the Cavs have the roster to where they could have a top 3 defense in basketball. They've got the defensive player of the year in Evan Mobley. They've got Jared Allen, who is still a very, very good rim protector. They've got a guy like DeAndre Hunter, who's going to be in the starting lineup that I think is a defensive upgrade over Max Strus against a lot of wings in the league. Maybe not against every matchup, but against a lot of them. And then you get to the backcourt and you say, well, it's hard to build a good defense around Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, 2 guards that are considered by most to be undersized. I would maybe push back about Donovan being undersized, but Darius certainly does qualify as a small guard. But my pushback to that would be, well, 3 years ago, that was the starting backcourt, and they finished with the number 1 defense in basketball. So it is possible to have a very good defense with those guys. But then I look at some of the players they'll be bringing in off the bench. Sure, they don't have that stalwart defensive stopper in Isaac Okoro, who JB Bickerstaff once upon a time called the best perimeter defender in basketball. But having somebody like Lonzo Ball that can be a very good perimeter defender and can help to use a lot of different lineups in a more efficient way, I think could be a really good thing for this team defensively. I think Sam Merrill is a good defender. I think Larry Nance Jr. will be a good defender. I think Dean Wade is one of the best defenders on this team. So you look up and down the roster, and I've talked a lot about this summer. I've talked a lot about how the Cavs roster changes made it so that opposing teams couldn't play their role players off the floor. And I believe that to be true. I still think that is the most important thing the Cavs did this summer, is they made it so when push comes to shove in the postseason, the Cavs can't look at their bench and say, yeah, you can't play in this series. Like, they could look at Isaac Okoro and say, you can't play in the series because opponents are not going to defend you. By the end of the Indiana series, Kenny Atkinson kind of looked at Ty Jerome and said, I can't play you in this series because 1, you're not making shots, and 2, you're getting targeted defensively repeatedly. That's a problem. They don't have guys like that. Like, you look at their top 8 right now, and we can, debate how much depth they have when it comes to the playoffs. And I think that is one of the things that will be very interesting about this regular season is how many guys is Kenny Atkinson going to have that he can trust when the postseason arrives. But if you look at this situation, you look down that bench. I mean, yes, Darius Garland is going to be somebody whose offense needs to outweigh his defense by a lot in the postseason. And I trust that he will if he's healthy. But you look at a lot of these guys down the roster, there aren't guys that you can play off the floor because of what they do defensively. Like, they don't have a bunch of guys that are Gary Payton or Victor Wembanyama defensively. I mean, they've got Evan Mobley, the defensive player of the year, but they also don't have guys that are turnstiles. They don't have guys defensively that you look at and just say, yeah, that guy's going to get cooked over and over and over again. And if somebody does have a rough night defensively, they've got a lot of different options at a lot of different positions. And there are a lot of different ways that this team could present itself on that defensive end of the floor. So I look at where they were last year, number 8 in defense. The year before, they were number 7 in defense, but I kind of think that number has an asterisk because Evan Mobley missed so much time. And even when he was on the floor, he wasn't always himself because of the knee injury, because of the ankle injury. Like, I just look at that year and say, you know what? That's kind of, for statistical purposes, that is kind of a lost season defensively. And that is what it is. But I don't think, given what the roster was last year, I don't think the 8th best defense was permissible. I think that this year, for the Cavs to be seriously considered as a championship contender, they need to be top 5 in both offense and in defense. I think the offense will take care of itself. Like, I just don't see a world where this team is not a good offensive team throughout the course of the season, or a great offensive team even, unless they continue to shoot the way they shot in that Pacers series where they were just abysmal from beyond the arc. I don't see how they would not be in the top 5 offensively. But I think the real test of if we should believe in this team to be a true championship contender, I think the real test is, can they build a top 5 defense? Can they be a team that sniffs the top 3 defensively? There are a lot of good defensive teams in basketball, but the Cavs also have one of the best rosters in the NBA with a lot of guys that are good defenders. We don't talk about what they should be defensively enough, but I think that is going to be one of the truer tests of where this team is at. Now, day 3 of Cavs camp is in the books down here in Florida. Day 4 will happen on Friday. We'll have much more from that over the weekend. But day 3 didn't actually involve basketball. I'll tell you what it did involve next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss, because right now new customers can bet just $5 and get 300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. I know what I said yesterday. It stinks. It stinks the Guardians lost. Minus 110 on the money line felt good. It did. And it did not come through. But luckily, we've got the Cleveland Browns to look at this weekend. The Browns are playing a 9:30 Eastern time game on Sunday morning in London against the Minnesota Vikings. And the Browns are plus 3.5. I hate to do this. I love the Vikings minus 3.5. The team that has been in Europe for 10 days and is fully acclimated to it versus the team that got there on Wednesday and is starting a rookie quarterback for the first time. I'm going to take the team that doesn't have those things. I'm going to take the team that's been there. Because they also have, like, the Browns have an awesome defense, and we assume that's going to go across the pond. But the Vikings have a very good defense too, and the Browns are not getting to, and Carson Wentz is not good, but the Browns are not getting to face a rookie quarterback the way the Vikings are. So I hate to say this, but if I were to make my first $5 bet on FanDuel again, which I've done this a long time ago, so I don't get to do this, but if you've not made a $5 bet on FanDuel to get your $300 in bonus bets, the Vikings minus 3.5 might be the play on FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com today, and download the free FanDuel app and get started. FanDuel, play your game. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first watch today and every day. You can find us on YouTube. And if you are watching, do us a favor, make sure you hit that thumbs up button, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. And on day 3 of training camp, the Cleveland Cavaliers didn't play basketball. They had an outdoor workout at IMG Academy. They were on the football field for a little bit, going through some calisthenics. They were on the track for a little bit. And the facilities at IMG Academy are outstanding. Like, the stuff they have here, whether it's football, basketball, tennis, incredible, baseball, golf. They have their own golf course here, which I did play the other day and is fantastic. This place is nicer than a lot of Division I colleges. And I'm not talking about like your Ohio States and Notre Dames and Michigans and stuff like that. Like, yeah, those places are nicer. But you look up and down like the MAC or the Sun Belt or, the Horizon League, stuff like that. IMG Academy has more resources than a lot of collegiate facilities, a lot of professional facilities. Like, this place is sick. So the Cavs were utilizing some of the other stuff aside from the basketball arena on Thursday. And after they were done with their workout, and I don't know everything that the workout entailed, but after they were done with their workout, they did do some team bonding. And I'm sure you've seen the videos that the Cavs have posted where they were on the baseball field taking a little bit of batting practice. It looked like Donovan Mitchell was pitching against Jalen Tyson, and Jalen Tyson did make contact with the pitch, which I can't wait to hear from Donovan how he feels about that, because he's somebody who has talked before about thinking that if he did dedicate himself to baseball, that he could have been a baseball player. And I know he played growing up, and obviously that is a love of his. If you follow him on social media, how frequently he will post about the New York Mets or even the Cleveland Guardians. So the Cavs had that team bonding, and they did this a little bit last year too. So last year, their third day of training camp, which came off of, day one of practice, and then day two, they had a scrimmage, which was the same thing last year. Like, they had a practice on Tuesday last year, they had a scrimmage on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, they went through a bunch of like baseline and sideline out of bounds plays. And then they played touch football in the gym at IMG Academy. So this year they kind of took that to a next level. They played a different sport, which is something that Kenny Atkinson is really big into. And I think that it's a good team bonding thing, but it's also a good way to kind of use different parts of your athletic brain, different parts of your athletic body in ways that you just wouldn't. And I think that those things are good things. And I'm not here to sit and be like, yes, these guys are all still developing and they're still learning how to be athletes. Like, that's not true. I do think player development is important, but I think it's a good thing to kind of, especially at the early part of what's going to be a very long season, right? Like, the Cavs are expecting to play basketball until the middle of June this year. And I think that if you can right now get away for, I don't know, a day and focus on something other than basketball while still trying to better yourselves, I think that's a good way to go about things. And I think that this kind of speaks to what the whole point of being in Bradenton or Sarasota, whatever you want to say, for the first week is. And yes, it's to get better at basketball. And I would imagine that Friday is going to be a tough practice, and they'll probably scrimmage, and the Cavs will be back on the hardwood, right? Like, they're not just forgetting about basketball, but it's more about team bonding. It's more about organizational bonding. Like, the Cavs have a lot of people down here. It's not just the 14 players on the roster and the guys on two-way contracts and the guys on Exhibit 10s and the coaching staff. Like, it's the organization is down here. And I think that getting the opportunity to lighten up a little bit, to share some laughs, to do some things that build those relationships and build those bonds during training camp is ultimately a really good thing that I do believe pays off, right? Like, I think, and guys have talked about how being here in this setting allows them to get to grow together, to get to form those bonds. And then when you do have to because at some point this year, the Cavs are going to go through adversity. At some point, they're going to hit a rough patch, and they're going to need to have honest conversations with each other. They're going to need to have some tough talks, and those things are easier to do when you have a lot of trust built up with each other. And I think that moments like Thursday help to do that for the Cavs. So I think it's a good thing they got off the floor for a little bit. They're not forgetting about basketball. They'll be back on the floor on Friday. They will be back scrimmaging, doing everything that goes along with basketball training camp on Friday. But ultimately, I think this is a good thing. I think it's a wise thing. And I think just being able to get your work done and have a little bit of fun in Florida is a good thing and a good way to start the season off on the right foot. So that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Cavs. Going to try and have something tomorrow, Saturday morning. Ideally, it's going to be up in the air, but I'm going to try. I fly back from Florida Friday night. Like, I get in at like 10 o'clock Friday night. So if I can record something Saturday morning, I will. I can't make a promise, but I am hoping to have a 6th episode this week up on Saturday. So make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else, or on YouTube as well, so that you don't miss it. If you are watching on YouTube, do us a favor as we get out of here. Hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. And I will be back later talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.